From 2021 to 2023, we ran a nature recovery project called Common Connections as part of a larger plan to link up wildlife habitat across the St Davids Peninsula and turn the bug farm into a nature reserve. The project aimed to connect and protect a 200-hectare wildlife habitat corridor, an area equivalent to almost 500 international football pitches. Over 140 hectares of this land is the internationally important wildlife habitat of the North West Pembrokeshire Commons Special Area of Conservation, or SAC, while 60 hectares is private farmland at Lower Harglodd, the Gurrid and Penwethers, together known as the Bug Farm, and Llanunwas near Solva. But why did this need to happen? Well, the UK is one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world. Over 88% of Wales is farmland, and therefore, to deliver landscape-level nature recovery and create joined-up wildlife habitats, we must find a way to work with private landowners. Working with farmers is also vital in order to manage common land. Farmers have commoners' rights to graze the SAC commons with a certain number of livestock. For example, Lower Harglodd has the rights to graze 60 cattle on Dowrog Common. Much of the SAC here is made up of heath, bog, mire and marshy grassland. These are largely man-made managed habitats, rich in human history and extremely rich in wildlife. However, this means that they require continued human management to keep them healthy. The SAC supports rare species such as the small red damselfly, floating water plantain, pale heath violet, wavy St John's wort, slender yellow century, chamomile, pillwort and three-lobed water crowfoot. But unfortunately, there are a number of threats to wildlife on the project land, and the same is true across the UK. The lack of connectivity or fragmentation of wildlife habitats mean that species cannot move between isolated areas and therefore can easily become locally extinct, as is the case here with the Marsh fritillary butterfly, which went locally extinct in 2013. A combination of undergrazing on the SAC and agricultural intensification on the private land corridor over the past 80 years has also led to a wider loss of biodiversity. The Marsh fritillary butterfly is particularly sensitive because its food plant, Devil's Bit scabious, requires very specific growing conditions. It's either been smothered by scrub or destroyed by overgrazing or draining land. Changes in farming practice over the years, driven by humans' insatiable appetite for cheap food, has led to everything being bigger and quicker, and the more intensive methods of today do not suit the intricacies associated with the management of wildlife habitat. Indeed, this is why the UK has lost over 97% of its wildflower meadows since the 1930s. But grazing wildlife habitat comes with its challenges. Modern livestock breeds need nutrient-rich grass in order to grow, and grazing the low-nutrient, uneven, boggy common land can cause them to actually lose weight over a summer grazing season. Grazing the SAC commons can also be a real hassle. Animals get stuck in bogs, it's time-consuming to check them, and then there are the biosecurity issues, such as TB, when multiple graziers are able to graze adjoining areas. To add to the mix, often a lack of proper boundary fencing means that there are frequent escapes. Therefore, we need to better incentivise our farmers and also horse owners to manage these habitats in order to make it work for both them and the wildlife. Along with the impact of synthetic pesticides and herbicides, the SAC is also threatened by high-nutrient synthetic fertiliser and slurry or manure runoff from surrounding intensive farmland, which is increasing the nutrients of the soils and water, meaning the more dominant grasses smother rare plants and water bodies become polluted, with algal blooms coating some ponds, starving them of oxygen. Invasive non-native species are also threatening the land. Japanese rose, Montbretier, New Zealand pygmyweed, Nuttall's waterweed, Japanese knotweed and Himalayan balsam are all encroaching onto project land and can smother native species. And then there's climate change, which changes the conditions that some species need to thrive. Indeed, a large wildfire swept through Penwethers in 2022 and was only stopped from reaching St Davids by the wet marshy grassland. We aim to address as many of these threats to the habitat as possible within the course of a year and a half. It was a busy time. A team of ecologists collected ecological data from across project land, and in the future we can use this information as a baseline to monitor habitat quality over time. Project land was surveyed for breeding birds, wintering birds, bees, butterflies, moths, dragonflies and damselflies, reptiles and amphibians, mammals, fungi, mosses and plants. The vegetation of all land was mapped and the underlying habitats were recorded. Environmental DNA, or eDNA, was then extracted from soils, ponds and rivers to help us build a more detailed picture of what's living here. It's really important to monitor how the habitats change over time using standard repeatable methods. So a local ecologist was contracted to develop management and monitoring plans for all project sites to help land managers best manage the land for nature. Lists of threats to the habitat were linked to costed actions, so we all know where best to spend our time and money in the future in order to look after our land. On the privately owned land, we wanted to create a mosaic of habitats to help wildlife move across the countryside between the different areas of the SAC, both extending the SAC habitats while also creating new habitats. We fenced land to enable more precise conservation grazing by livestock and created 4 hectares of new wildflower meadows. As part of meadow creation, we instigated a long-term trial to investigate whether growing, cutting and removing green manure crops that pull nutrients from the soil into leaves prior to seeding with wildflowers can speed up the process of meadow creation. We improved the nature value of another 6 hectares of existing semi-improved grassland by rotivating strips before spreading locally collected wildflower seed and plug planting around 6,000 native wildflower plug plants across the fields. We created 2 hectares of biodiverse herbal lays and planted 5.5 hectares of arable crops to create habitat for rare arable plants, which is a priority habitat in this part of Pembrokeshire. With the hope of bringing yellowhammers back to our farms, we planted a heritage wheat crop, and each year up to half the crop will be harvested and milled into flour, while the other half will be left to feed overwintering birds. This work has already started to encourage new species to our farms, and we've been delighted to find harvest mouse nests, watch barn owls hunting and spot otters using the streams. We also planted 2,000 trees to thicken existing hedgerows, creating shelter belts and new hedgerows, and protected over 3,000 metres of hedgerows with new fences. We put up spotted flycatcher nest boxes, built a wildlife watching hide, created bare earth for solitary bees, made new glades and woodland rides, and created or improved 8 ponds for wildlife. As part of a wider woodland creation project on site in memory of my amazing late parents, we planted clover-rich cover crops in advance of planting 5.5 hectares of woodland at Lower Hadclough and Penwethers, with the aim that the clovers would smother the grass weeds, negating the need for standard chemical herbicide treatments that are used during the first 3 years of woodland establishment. The clover crops largely established well and tree survival rates are high. We also trialled different plastic-free tree guards as an alternative to the single-use plastic guards used as standard in planting schemes. This is a long-term experiment and will deliver the final report to tree planting contractors and Welsh Government in a bid to help improve the sustainability of future tree planting schemes. Despite working across all these different habitats, our focal species was the locally extinct Marsh fritillary butterfly, as it's an indicator of well-managed marshy grassland and heath. The bug farm team surveyed and mapped the 200 hectares to find out if there's sufficient suitable condition habitat to investigate the possibility of a species reintroduction. For its long-term survival, a marsh fritillary metapopulation requires between 80 and 120 hectares of suitable condition habitat that contains its food plant, Devil's Bit scabious, and at least 10 hectares of exceptional habitat packed full of the scabious, which is classed as good condition. We found that there was over 100 hectares of suitable habitat and 8.6 hectares of good condition habitat. And this information suggests that with the creation of just a little more good condition habitat, we can move forwards with planning a reintroduction of this iconic butterfly. We started this process immediately by planting over 2,000 Devil's Bit scabious plants across project land, contacting other farmers who could create and manage marsh fritillary habitat on their land, and are busy planning the next stages already. But all of this work is for nothing if there's not a long-term habitat management plan in place that in practice is actually going to be followed. Luckily, another big project, the Lifequake project, is working to improve management on the SAC itself with a large programme of fencing and other actions. This work will also help to increase the area of suitable habitat for the marsh fritillary butterfly in the long term. But whereas the SAC has legal protection for wildlife, the private sites don't. After our days, our private land could be sold and converted back into intensive farmland. Indeed, we found out that legislation does not currently exist in Wales to allow us to place a conservation covenant on our land. Therefore, with our solicitors, we've drawn up a trust and linked it to our wills to protect habitat at the bug farm for nature forever after our days, and also to look after our animals for the rest of their lives. The various templates are available on our website for others to download and use to help them protect their land for nature forever too. As you wander around the Bug Farm Visitor Trail, you'll come across information on all the different aspects of this project in more detail and see what the work we've done looks like in real life. We've improved public access to nature by erecting a wildlife watching hide and interactive displays and siting recycled farm plastic benches across the habitat. And we hope that you agree with us that in a human-dominated world, where we humans as one species have caused a mass extinction event of other species, that we need to make sure that we protect the remaining areas of wildlife habitat at all costs. And more than this, we need to connect them up to allow wildlife to move across a hostile planet. Conservation is no longer enough. We need nature recovery at a grand scale.